Hey, friends, welcome to the Living Truth Podcast. This is your host, Michael Carey, and today I have an awesome guest, Sam Jolman. Sam and I were just having a beautiful conversation before we hit record. And guys, you are going to love this episode. You're going to love this interview, and you're going to love Sam. He is lighthearted and easy to be with, and this is just such an important book that he has written. So he is an author and a therapist, a counselor. The book is The Sex Talk You Never Got, Reclaiming the Heart of Masculine Sexuality, and which I have that book here for those of you that have the visual. The book is the really the topic of this podcast episode, and so Sam, thanks so much for joining us today.
Michael, it's so good to be here. I've been excited for our conversation.
Yeah. Anything you want to add to that? Your history, your resume, whatever, counselor, author, that kind of thing is pretty obvious. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, I think it goes without saying for especially your audience that, credentials only get you so far in terms of knowledge about something. And I'll just say that I came at this subject of my book, as a man who did not get the adequate sex talk that I needed and all that came after that, right? The story that unfolded. So many of us men were left to figure out sexuality on our own. And it's probably the place we've had the least meaningful conversations in our lives in terms of our formation in life. And as you know, that can lead to so many places of living your sexuality in the shadows or living with shame. Um, I think we have this expectation as men that sexuality should just work, right? And that men are always sort of ready to go and it just works and of course that's not true for any man. It's so connected to our heart and our story. And so, being introduced with credentials, hopefully that means I've gone and thought about this more intentionally. But I did want to just say, I comment this as well, just being a man who got lost in the shadows with my own sexuality and had to find my way out. So this is the talk I'm giving to my young man, as well, the younger me, but also hoping it's a gift, obviously, to men as well.
Yeah, exactly. That was really the some of the first comments I was going to ask you to riff on is that just a particular moment or conversation or something specific, where did you at what point would you say that you decided or what triggered it that you knew like this was something you had to write, you had to do this?
Yeah. It had been brewing for a number of years just out of my own work. And then obviously sitting with clients and, sitting with men who it seemed like the way, especially coming out of Christian environments, that men could talk about their sexuality. It always seemed to be they thought about their sexuality as, am I behaving or not behaving? Right? This very behavioral, am I holding it together or am I acting out? And that was the kind of one way they thought about their sexuality. And there was no real deeper reflection on the heart of it, or at least that they weren't being invited to that conversation. And so I thought, man, we need to have a better conversation here. And then, the biggest incentive for me to do this was the Me Too movement, when, the world was kind of disclosing all of the harm that had been done in the name of male sexuality, right? A lot of disclosure of sexual abuse or sexual harm that women have suffered, but including just the daily cat calls or sexualization that women had experienced from men. And the question I think the world was asking is, and at least it's felt like in the subtext is, something like, is male sexuality just sort of fundamentally broken? Is it just this, right? That is there a way to be different as a man? And of course, being a Christian and having some sense of understanding that God meant something really good when he made male sexuality, that it was created in Eden, um, you know, as something good that was meant to shine his glory in the world. I knew that it wasn't fundamentally broken, that God, your sexuality as a man is the artwork of God. He meant something good that's meant to be spoken to the world. What is that? Right? That was the chase for me of like, I want to invite men to something better than just thinking, well, I guess I'm just a monster that the best I can get is kind of behaving, and that's
Mhm.
it. Um, and so going on the hunt for what is the vision of a virile and good man, right? That's not
Mhm.
just like, well, I have to kill my sexuality to be good. No, there you can be virile and good. So that was the final push to say, okay. And then obviously a number of years of reading and researching and exploring to get to the point of publishing last year. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Awesome. Yeah, that is so true. You know, and I think you wrote that something to that effect where most men carry this disconnected, confused, or shame-based view of sexuality. And what is there anything else in addition to those? I mean, those are so true. Like it's just broken. The best that I could do is hold it together,
yeah.
whatever that looks like. I mean, is there anything else that you want to add to that? And how is that perspective of male sexuality broken?
Yeah, I think it just again sets us up to feel like monsters, or to feel like maybe even deeper, that anything that moves in us, right? That anything sexual that moves in us is probably lust or the beginning of sexual acting out, and it's probably dirty or bad. And no sense of holding arousal as actually a gift from God, or even beginning to understand, that, as I say in the book, you are created to be a lover, that God wired you. And I would say that's the thing that shines God's glory in the world, is that you are a good lover. You are wired to be a good lover. And that means obviously in the act of sex, but beyond that, just the act of romance, which I call the adventure of love, right? It's not just flowers and chocolates on overpriced flowers and chocolates on Valentine's Day, right? It's the adventure
Uh,
of love. It's all the adventures you take in the journey of love with your partners. So that could be, going to Hawaii, hiking through Europe. Um, but it can also be sitting on a counselor's couch, right? That's an adventure of love as well. Or, asking your partner about their heart and their day, or exploring their story with them, um, or working through a fight. Like those are all parts of love and romance in itself. And men are just as equipped as women to take on those things. We're no less capable of that
mhm.
depth of relationship. But we just don't have that in our culture as men. Um, but again, I would invite you to the vision of Eden, which is Adam. What does Adam do when he meets the first fully naked woman, right? Shining in her naked glory. Um, what is, I mean, he's awoken from a dream, right? Where God does surgery to create Eve from his rib, right? And what is the first thing he does? He breaks out in poetry. Now it's clear,
Mhm.
obviously, they make love and they have all the passion of love, right? They conceive children. But in that moment, his first response is to break out in verse, to break out in poetry. In other words, his body and his heart are in unison, right? Or you think of the book of Song of Songs, right? Again, clear depictions of very erotic lovers who are sneaking away as often as they can to be with each other, even to go make love in the countryside, right? And yet it's not just the physical act of trying to get release that the man is after. he's also falling in love with all the sensuality of his wife's beauty, right? And he
Hmm.
walks through,
Yeah.
her hair being like a flock of goats coming down Mount Bashan, or, which is probably hilarious to us. You have all your teeth still, right? Which in a time of, the absence of dental care, right? That was actually a mark of beauty. You still have your teeth. Um,
Hmm.
and and so, he's falling in love with all of her, and he's writing poetry about it. So I'm not saying every man needs to
Hmm.
become a poet,
Right.
although I think you
Right.
could. But I am saying that you have this in you too. You're made to be a sensual lover. You are made to be good at this. And I tend to, we tend to think of like, oh, romance is for women and sex is for men, right?
Mm.
And I just want to say that's just so minimizing to you as a man. And
Hmm.
that's not any man I've ever sat with, right? No man just wants sex. Now, some
Hmm.
men say that they do.
They
Um,
think it. Yeah. They
yeah, they
think
think
that's what
that's
it
all I
is.
want, right? But as
Hmm.
soon as you start to ask them, well, what do you love about sex, right?
Hmm.
They'll say all the sensual things that sound like the lovers. Um,
Yeah.
Adam in the garden, or the lover in Song of Songs. So again, what I would invite you as the reader or as the listener to sit with, and as I invite readers to sit with, is there's more to you as a man. The heart of your sexuality is you are a lover. That is your deepest sexual identity. You are a
Hmm.
lover. Um, and we lose that heart. We don't have that fostered. We don't have many conversations among men
Hmm.
about that sort of stuff, but I have
Yeah.
men sit in my counseling office and say all the time things like, gosh, sometimes I feel like I must be the woman in the relationship because,
Hmm.
I am impacted by all the emotional stuff. And I
Ah.
want that stuff. I want the deep conversations with my wife.
Hmm.
I want the romantic getaways. I don't just want sex, but it feels like I'm supposed to just
Hmm.
want sex. And again, that I think minimizes us as men and reduces us
Right.
down, kind of more of a pornified view of us as men.
Yeah. Exactly. That brokenness. And yeah, you were touching on some things that I definitely want to lean into, but I just wanted to go backwards for a minute and just think about the title of this book. And first of all, I want to say, we're definitely not going to lean into some of these things as excuses for unwanted sexual
Hmm.
behavior or even reasons. I know that that can be even a term that can validate the inappropriate behavior or create some kind of entitlement. That's not
Hmm.
at all what we're talking about. But really digging into some of the roots, and there are so many. And yeah, we're going to tap on some of them. But the first one is, I mean, it's just the title of this book, The Sex Talk You Never Got.
Hmm.
So I'll tell you the sex talk that my father gave me: have sex before you get married. Make sure
Mm,
you're compatible.
mm.
That was it.
Wow.
That was
Yeah.
it. That was the sex talk. It was
Wow.
just brief, and that was it. That was the only. He just gave me that advice. Make sure you're compatible. Now I was a believer, and this was not like when I was 13. We're talking about 20s. I'm pretty sure. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but pretty
Hmm.
sure I was dating and probably getting
Mm.
serious, maybe talking about marriage. So it really is so broken. And
Yeah.
there are so few models out there. Like, what is it? The models are the brokenness. The male
Uh-huh.
role models that we have for
Yes.
this
Yes.
are, you know, I'm just trying to stay pure. I'm trying to be good, trying to not be. It's all
Hmm.
about that behavior modification, behavior, and
Hmm.
the role models, and so the talk. that we get. So that's a such a beautiful
Yeah.
title, is sitting down with a guy. Like, so you're going to sit down with a guy and you're going to give him the sex talk that he never got. That would be like me, you know. I never
Yeah.
got this. I never knew all these things that you're laying out here in the book. So that's why, yeah, the title and the beauty of that. Anything you want to add or riff on that a little bit on just
Yeah.
what we don't get, you know, and all that and the brokenness there.
Right. And, just to say, um, gosh, my heart is moved by what you've shared, right? Because there's what's said and then there's what's not said. And the subtext of that comment from your father, right? Essentially, you know, diminishing uh, the act of sex to a trial of making sure it works, right? And not understanding the connection to the heart of it, the romance of it, or the fidelity of it, right? And as well, what's not said. And I start the book with a story of a 14-year-old young man who, when he turned 14, he came down the stairs on a Saturday morning and got out his cereal to make breakfast and sat down at the table to eat. And his father was in the kitchen making coffee and milling about, and his father turned and threw something to him, and he caught it in his hands, and he looked down to see a pack of condoms, and he was startled. It's Saturday morning. He's
Mm.
not even done with his Cheerios, right? And
Wow.
he looks up to his
Wow.
dad, and his dad says, "Just don't get a girl pregnant,"
Wow.
and walks
Right.
out. Right? And apparently his dad must have thought he'd come of age, and this was the sex talk. You know?
Hmm.
And again,
Yeah.
much like you've shared, there's so much being said that's not being said, right? In that act, it feels a little bit like blessing or permission,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's actually a kind of cursing. And that was a man
Hmm.
that sat in my office um,
Mm.
as a client, and as he shared that story, wept with me about the absence of love and care he
Hmm.
felt. And I think, you know, is that father evil for what he did? Well, he's responsible for it, but my goodness, we have generations of men that
Right.
that did not get much meaningful conversation, did not get the sex talk. So our
Yeah.
fathers have shame, right,
Hmm.
around their sexuality. And I know that to be true of my father. And what kept him silent and mute with me about the conversation. But again, there's such a sense of you're left to figure this out on your own, or worse, right? You're set up to have a kind of curse, like you've
Hmm.
described.
Hmm. Yeah. And then the culture just turned it into entertainment and an act and isolated it when really, you know, it's far more, there's far more to it than that. And
Mhm.
yeah, you alluded to some of that a little earlier, just talking about the romance and all of the different parts of love. And
Mhm.
it really reflects how, I mean, it looks like how we reflect the image of God because he is love. And it's all of the different parts, all of the things that happen before sex. It isn't just about the act, but there's so
Yeah.
much more. There's so much more. And the interesting thing is that when you learn that more, if you will, and all of the things, and you really start to develop intimacy in a solid marriage, that act becomes far better too. That's
Yes.
the
Right.
result.
Right. Right. That biblical word, used of Adam and Eve. Adam knew Eve, and she conceived, right?
Right,
That sense
right.
of, that sex being referred to as a knowing.
Hmm.
I did some reading, for my book on hookup culture, which is, the sexual culture in college campuses. And they described that hookup culture meaning anonymous sex, right? Just hooking up and doing,
Mm,
anything from kind of anything sexual together anonymously, that it requires alcohol use to work, meaning there's an
mm,
essential need to numb the body to
mhm.
allow it to be anonymous.
Wow.
um that it's
Wow.
not just it Writers describe it's essential. It's not just, oh yeah, they tend to do this while they're drinking. No, they say it's required,
Uh-huh.
to be able to numb
Yeah.
out all of that absence of knowing. um and
Wow.
so you're right to say it's, is it all that meaningful or even pleasurable or sensual? No.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm.
And we know this, even the pornography industry has to make up for the absence of knowing, the absence of a good story.
Hmm.
I listened to a podcast that was describing, what's the difference between Song of Songs and pornography?
Hmm.
And they said it's their conclusion, you can have your opinion on this as well, was it's the storyline. That pornography, largely the storyline, just the point of the storyline is just to build to the act of sex, right? Versus Song of Songs, where the act of sex is a part of the knowing. It's a part of the
Hmm.
romance, right? That there's fidelity and self-sacrifice and love as a part of it. And that
Hmm.
sensuality thrives in the safety of commitment, right? It
Hmm.
thrives in the safety of long-term relationship, as you're
Yeah.
describing so well. And that, you have a chance to get to know each other, including knowing each other's bodies, but each other's hearts. And that creates that intimacy then that flourishes and thrives in the play of sex. Um, and
Hmm.
again, to say that, to men, like, that's not something I believe you've probably been taught, that you are fully capable of deep emotional intimacy as well as sexual intimacy, that you're no different than a woman. There's not a difference in your capacity to be able to practice emotional connection, attachment,
Hmm.
sensuality, deep feeling, vulnerability. All of that is in you. We just don't talk about that much in our culture as men.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, we could probably do a full interview and podcast episode just on that, and
Yes.
all the reasons behind that. But
Right.
I'm sure one of them is fear of how we look. We look less masculine,
Right.
we'll say.
Which is so
But
weird, right? That somehow, the risk of vulnerability is less masculine, when,
right,
research
right,
would say that vulnerability is actually our most accurate measurement of courage, the
exactly
capacity
right.
to be
Hmm.
vulnerable.
Yeah,
uh by
yeah, and
research is our
strength.
most accurate measure of courage.
Because it takes more risks than anything
Yeah.
else.
Yes.
Risking being vulnerable is it's risky. Opening
Right.
ourselves up for that risk, that actually takes more courage than, well, a lot of other things that men probably define as courage. But hmm,
Right. Literally, the word vulnerability means able to be wounded. Right. In other words, you're literally putting yourself out there.
hmm,
It's not just cute language, right? You're allowing yourself, I'm opening myself up to the risk of being wounded relationally.
yeah,
Um, it's baked in to the word.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is another topic to kind of shift gears a little bit, is on the woundedness, and you speak to that. The I mean, the father wounds of this lack of sex talk. I think I would identify that as a wound, this huge
Hmm.
major part of my life that I'm going to carry with me, into my marriage and everything. And I would say that lack of conversation could be identified as a wound, right?
Hmm.
And then what else? When I talk, when you think about guys that are maybe in recovery and white knuckling it and not really digging into the hard issues behind unwanted sexual behavior, Can you speak to that a little bit? The
Mm.
woundedness, the wounds of emotional neglect, the wounds that drive unwanted sexual behavior. Can you
Hmm.
riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say um, there are way more men than we acknowledge who have stories of sexual harm inherent um, in their past. And I would say, the stats say something like 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 men have acknowledged that they have sexual abuse in their story. But that
Wow.
stat is most almost guaranteed to be low, because there was another
Right.
study that said men are 4 times less likely to talk about their sexual abuse. And from my own experience of sitting with men, most men that have a story of sexual abuse bury it with, there's some weird things that happened when I was a kid.
Right.
They tend to hold it as their shame, their weakness, their own perversion, even. Um,
Yeah.
and so, you know, something even as overt as sexual abuse, which I know Patrick Carnes said the comorbidity of sex addiction and sexual abuse, I think it was like 85% or something, from his book Out of the
Hmm.
Shadows. Um,
Mm.
and
Wow.
I mean, that is like statistically almost a 1-to-1 correlation, right? That sexual addiction, correlates with sexual abuse in your story. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that's true. I'm not saying every man has sexual abuse. That's not true.
Right.
But way more than we acknowledge. Um, and
Yeah.
and that's overt molestation. But then there's all of the other subtle ways we experience sexual harm as
Hmm.
young men. And, you know, there are, I have a friend, as I tell the story in the book, um, who was on a fly fishing trip with his father and his uncle. And I mean, he had come of age. He's 14. He knew his father and uncle went on this fly fishing trip every year. He's finally invited along. He's giddy. He's packing the truck, um, and sitting behind them listening to their stories. And he tells the story of pumping gas with his dad, um, at a gas pump on the way there. And he went to put the gas pump in and he accidentally squeezed the handle or something and sprayed gas all over the truck. And his
Ah.
dad looks at him in a huff of anger and says, "You're nothing but a wet dream." Jams the gas
Wow.
thing in, pushes him
Wow.
out of the way, and finishes pumping the gas.
Wow.
And that was an act of sexual degradation to my
Mm.
friend.
Yeah.
And I say that not because I can say that, right? But because he said that. And he said that this is a man
Mm.
in my men's group. Um, and he said that with tears streaming down his face, that his father named him as nothing more than a wet dream.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, right? Like, what a
Yeah.
diminishment of it, and a sexual diminishment. And again, is
Exactly.
that overt sexual abuse? No. But
Hmm.
is that sexually harmful to him?
Yeah.
Yes. Right? And it impacted him and his sense of, and not just that story, obviously, but evil, the realm of evil used that story to really, you
Yeah.
know, make him hesitant as a man, as he entered into marriage, as he
Yeah.
entered into the adventure and journey of romance, um,
Hmm.
just his own confidence. So,
Yeah.
as we talk about wounding, I would invite you as a man to sit with, you actually did experience sexual formation. It may not have been through a healthy sex talk or a healthy ongoing sex talk, um, because it's not meant to be just one, right? But a conversation. But your formation is all the things you went through as a man that
Hmm.
shaped your sexuality. And that
Right.
includes the overt stories of sexual harm. It
Right.
includes the subtle stories of being sexually mistreated, but it also includes things like how you experienced affection, what it was like to be around your parents' marriage and romance. What did you notice? How did that set the cadence for what you thought love was?
Yeah.
How were you treated when you wanted a hug as a boy?
Mm,
How was your
right.
body narrated to you?
Mm, mm,
Right? Was it were you encouraged to see your body as the artwork of God?
uh-huh.
How about your sense of play? Right? How are you blessed in your play and your embodiment? Meaning, like, there's
Mm,
all kinds of other things that impact our sexuality than just
right.
overt sexual harm, although that's also there.
Yeah. There's so much in there, but I think the next piece of that was really reclaiming that heart. And with all of
Hmm.
that, with all the wounds and all the things that you're there's so much. I mean,
Hmm.
what you're describing, there are so many different pieces and moving parts to that. And for some guys, maybe it might seem overwhelming. There's so many things in our story and what was modeled to us, what
Hmm.
wasn't, and yes, all of that. Those seemingly well one-off situations like the
Hmm.
gas pump where something happens and we don't really want to talk about it or admit it, but
Hmm.
all the things that form who we are today.
Hmm.
Diving into that and really unpacking that, and then leaning into, I mean, what does it really look like? You mentioned the idea of reclaiming the heart, like sexuality
Hmm.
has a heart. You said that, and how do you do that? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think um, at some level, you've got to walk the terrain of your own story. And I acknowledge with you, that, is there a risk of kind of living entitled? Like, well, I couldn't help it. See, I have this story and that's why I've sexually acted out, and it is what
Right.
it is. I would say, walking through your story is not an act of entitlement. It's actually very difficult to face pain. And what I'm actually inviting you to do is actually experience and heal and grieve with kindness the pain you've held in your story. And I'm convinced that sex addiction is actually the way we keep ourselves split. It is how we manage our divided heart. It's how we manage our wounds, our trauma,
Mm.
right? Even our
Yeah.
present day wounds, right? They don't have to be just childhood pain, but
Right.
your addiction is actually how you're avoiding pain. It's
Hmm.
and how you're avoiding your wounds. So, is there risk of entitlement? I don't think there is if you are
Hmm.
genuinely being kind to your pain, meaning
Mm.
I'm gonna let myself grieve it,
Right.
and face it, not just sort of manage it from a distance, um, right? But I'm actually gonna face it and walk into it.
Hmm.
And that act of self kindness,
Yeah.
self love, uh, will take a lot from you, because you'll have to feel pain again. And again,
Yeah.
not pain just
Yeah.
sadistically, but pain with a different level of kindness. Most of us,
Mm.
in our we don't bury our trauma primarily because of its pain. I'm convinced we bury our pain far more because of the shame it holds, because there was no one
Yeah.
there to help us
Yeah.
actually grieve it. And
Hmm.
so we just shove it down and think it was a sign of our own weakness, right? Or like my friend who,
Hmm.
he's leveled by this moment with his dad, the gas pump, um, and he's left to sort of absorb those words without a chance to really grieve them, right?
Yeah.
So I would invite you to actually walking the terrain of your story will help you heal narcissism, egocentrism, right? Being, entitled is not the same as self love. It's actually a commitment to shame. And that might sound complex, but self love is the antidote to egoism, being actually kind to yourself, right? Because, again, sexually acting out is not in any way bringing you honor or help,
No.
right? It's
Right.
wrecking your life. We know this, right? It's
Hmm.
actually the realm of evil convincing you to sabotage your life. So the antidote to self-sabotage is an act of self-love.
Mm.
So grieving your wounds, there's not a danger of you becoming entitled if you genuinely grieve them.
Yeah.
Meaning, I'm going to sit in the truth of what happened, and I'm going to sit in it with kindness, and I'm going to
Yeah.
let myself be vulnerable to the pain that's
Yeah.
there, and I'm going to do that gut wrenching work. I guarantee you will be changed, and you
Hmm.
won't be as seduced by the false, sirens of sex addiction,
Right.
because you'll start to realize this is actually doing nothing but degrading me.
Right.
Right?
Right.
This is sabotaging my life. These are substitutes. Um,
Hmm.
so I think that path is essential to the work of recovery.
Hmm. Absolutely. So well said. And entering into that pain, I've found God is gracious too. He doesn't just throw us in and we don't experience all of the pain of trauma all
Right.
at once.
Right.
That would be
That would kill us.
we would have to be admitted, or at least I'll just going to speak for myself. I would have to be admitted into, a psych
Yes.
ward or whatever.
Same.
Like,
It would
no,
crack
but
you. It would
it
break you.
comes, yeah,
Yes.
it comes in waves, it comes out, and facing
Yes.
it and experiencing it is self-love. But not only
Yes.
that, I think when you talk about self-love, what you're really talking about is love your neighbor as yourself. You're actually
Yes.
when you can move past that pain, on the other side of it is more love for other people as well. You have
Right.
more capacity. And not only that, but the shame, reducing shame. Shame really is so much of it is rooted in what other people think of me. What are you going to think about my story if I really lean
Hmm.
into it, if I talk about it, all of those things. And
Hmm.
the interesting thing I found is, you know what? Everyone else has their shame story too.
Right.
I don't think any human being makes it through life without some level of trauma, brokenness, and shame.
Right.
So all of the things that evil was convincing us to hide and medicate, they're so layered with lies. You are so right. The evil and it's destroying us. It is not helping us. It feels good in a moment, but it's not. It's not.
Hmm.
The true expression, I mean, it's just like if you take your car and drive it off a cliff. It wasn't meant to be driven off of a cliff,
Hmm.
Use it the way
Hmm.
that the owner has
Hmm.
prescribed. And that's what you're
Hmm.
inviting guys to do, really discover the heart of masculinity, heart of real masculine love
Hmm.
and sex that
Hmm.
God designed. Going back to the origin.
Hmm.
That's so beautiful. Exactly. And so diving into that is, I think it takes time and patience, right? But I love
Yes.
the way you described it. It's self-love, but also so appropriate and needed. Hmm.
And I would say your story is already being acted out in your sexual acting out. So,
Mm.
it's not like you need to go find your story and figure out what these wounds are per se. It's not other work. In many ways, I would say your story's already getting reenacted every time you use pornography or act out sexually in your unwanted sexual behavior. So your story's there. I'm just inviting you to face it, right? And
Right.
in other words,
Yes.
that, you know, again, back to Patrick Carnes' connection, we're acting out our wounds in our fantasy life, in our sexual acting out. Those wounds don't just go underground and sit in a bunker somewhere inside of us, right? They get reenacted, and they get
Yeah.
reenacted in ways that further the harm.
Yes.
Meaning, like,
Hmm.
you know, that sense of the symbolism in your acting out is, as my friend Jay Stringer would say, the path to your healing.
Yeah.
Meaning, if you pay attention to the symbolism of your acting out, you can find your story and clues to the
Mm.
wounds that need to be addressed and healed.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I'm just inviting you to turn the lights on, so to speak, and actually face the story that's there, rather than simply just reenact it.
Hmm. Yeah. I think of it in, I've always said this so many times. It's feels like locking angry dogs in the basement, like they find
Yeah.
a way out. They find a way
Yes.
out some way
Right.
or another. It isn't like it's gone forever. Pushing it down doesn't work.
Right. Because
I
you were not
know,
meant to
I've
be
tried.
split. Right.
I've
Haven't we
tried
all? Haven't we all?
for many,
Yes.
many years.
Your heart wants to be whole, and it will not suffer. It will not suffer being split very long. Meaning,
Hmm.
if you shove parts of you in the basement, parts of your story, parts of yourself you don't like, eventually they'll come roaring back at you. I like the image of a dog, of a pack of dogs, right?
Hmm.
They will not be ignored for very long. So,
Right.
yes, this is really an invitation to find lost parts of you
Mm.
that were split off because of trauma, but probably buried because of shame.
Hmm.
And the more whole you become, as you named very well, the path to empathy for like your partner or the people in your life is self-love. Your first act of empathy needs to be towards your own story,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
then out of that, right, you can love your neighbor as you love yourself. um
Right. So many places that we need to look under the hood and dive into to really recover that wholeness of sexuality and what we were really meant to have. And
mhm.
I know there's so many parts you talked about initiation and that most men never received a blessing, and there's so many different things moving forward. I think maybe if you touch on that as we get ready to
Mhm.
close here in just a minute, but that I just really wanted to include that and the beauty of that. Not only just
Mm.
that, but just moving forward. What would you suggest guys do in a practical sense
Mm.
with that healing? I mean, it needs to happen in the context of community, right?
Yeah, finding kind environments to walk this out, absolutely. It um shame dies. I think this is an Ann Voskamp line. Shame dies in safe places. When we tell our story in
Uh,
safe places, I think she says. And I would agree with that 100%, that finding kind people that will hold your story well for you is important work. And, yes, there's something initiating about facing our pain. And I don't like that fact, but I do believe God fathers us through our courage to face our pain. And he rewards
mm,
us for that. And I think, the initiation of the lover, it's a little bit different than the initiation of the warrior in us, right? There's I think about my
mm,
sons, one of my greatest um, places that I'm pumping my fist secretly as a dad these days is, whenever my sons notice a beautiful sunset and say, Dad, you gotta come see the sunset or the sunrise.
mm,
There's something about that capacity to receive beauty and be awed by beauty as a man that, again, I just don't know that we have many places where that gets blessed as an
mm,
appreciation.
right.
Um,
Mm,
I have a man that told me a story of, he remembers in high school, he wrote poetry to a girl, and somebody got their hands on it. Some of the guys got their hands on it, and he just got royally mocked. I think it was in
oh,
the locker room, or by the lockers in the back hall somewhere. And he
yeah.
remembers just getting obliterated for, like, you wrote poetry to a girl, and he remembers at that point he
Mm,
quit. And
yeah.
I mean, talk about it, just a cursing of the lover in him.
Right. Right.
So I believe God wants to initiate that part of you as well. Not just the warrior, not just the part that can face hardship or suffering or pain, but also the part, that can experience healthy sensuality, healthy beauty, um,
Mm-hmm.
being able to take in sunsets, being able to write your own poetry, being able to receive, the pleasure of a good meal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's it's not just, hey, do all this story work and face all this pain. That's true. That's a part of it. But it's also like God returning you to healthy pleasure, healthy
Mm-hmm.
delight in his good world.
Yeah.
Um, being able to be the poet lover, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
that can
Right.
receive the world. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I believe God wants
Yeah.
to initiate that part too.
That's the journey, and so much hope there. I think that guys can get there, following that path. So yeah, I'd love for you in closing, just if you can give a little bit about some of the resources, your website, and then you were talking about a monthly conversation and some of your
Yeah.
writing and stuff in addition to your book.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, samjolman, JOLMAN.com. And if you buy my book, there's some free bonuses there for buying that book. Um, a little ebook on how to give a sex talk to your children. There's also a free chapter if you just want to check the book out, just for signing up for my Substack. And then I'm releasing a study guide real soon for groups or just for your own, guided journey through the book if you'd like. And that's going to be free as well. And then, yes, I write monthly on a Substack articles on healthy male sexuality, the Christian story, trauma healing, all of that stuff. And then I host, if you become a paid subscriber, all those articles are free. But if you become a paid subscriber, I also do a Zoom conversation once a month. And those are incredible times of just getting to go deeper with a group of folks and just discuss these topics. So I would love to meet you
Mm-hmm.
there, have you join us, have you read any and all of the
Mm-hmm.
above.
Beautiful. Sam, thanks so much for joining us today. It's been very, very insightful, and I know it's going to be a huge blessing for all who are listening here.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Michael. It's rich being here.